everyone, today we are tackling a Renaissance chemise. After doing a lot of research, I've settled on a design similar in style to many chemises from the 16th or 17th century. This type of chemise is a very classic and timeless undergarment, and while it has changed a lot over the centuries, many of its basic components have remained the same. I hope to use this garment as a building block for many projects I have planned in the not-so-distant future, and have kept to a very basic style for this reason. While drafting this pattern, I had originally accounted for extra length at the bottom of the back panel piece. However, I completely forgot to include it in the actual pattern. I stitched the back piece higher along the shoulder seam for a more comfortable fit, and as a result, the bottom is much higher in the back than the front. There's a few different ways I could fix this, but I decided to wait until I could try the garment on and assess the length while it was actually being worn. I also made the sleeves much longer than necessary to give me more styling options. At this point, I hadn't decided what type of sleeves I wanted on the gowns that would go over top of this garment, and I wanted that extra length for poofy styling should the need arise.
The first thing I'm going to do is stitch the gussets to one side of the sleeves with right sides together. Then I'll flip the sleeves over and sew the sleeves and the gusset to one of the main body pieces. When stitching the sleeves and the gusset to the main body piece, I had to do more math to make sure it's lined up properly. The seam between the sleeve and the gusset should be 2 inches from the top of the front body piece and 6 inches from the top of the back body piece. I'm also going to be very careful not to stitch the seam allowance down when attaching all the pieces together to avoid any weird bubbling or puckering at the corner of the gussets. Here I'm just stitching the other side of the sleeve down on the other body piece before flipping the whole project in half and finishing the sides and the sleeves. I'm going to start at the corner of the gusset and sew down the side of the body pieces, and then come back up to do the same on the sleeves. As you can see, the back body piece is quite a bit shorter than the front, but everything else is coming along nicely.
next thing I'm going to do is finish most of the raw seams so they don't get in the way while gathering and finishing the rest of the chemise. I prefer starting with the gusset square and making my way outward when finishing the edges. First, I trimmed all the seam allowances to about ½ inch since I wanted a slightly bigger seam for this project. Then I cut the seam that is going to be covered by the other side to about ¼ inch and used a whip stitch to finish it all down. After I started stitching, I very quickly realized I was getting this funny puckering happening in the seam, which I immediately knew was because I had skipped ironing before starting on this step. And while I still didn't want to use the iron, I did go back and restart the step after finger pressing the seam, which did the trick well enough. I was really undecided if I should finish these sleeve to shoulder seams now or later, but it ended up not being much of a difference either way, and it would have saved me a lot of time to just finish them now along with everything else. I also ended up leaving the very end of the sleeve unfinished too, since I figured I'd need to trim it up quite a bit later on anyway. Everything is gathered loosely where it needs to be now, but the extra long threads will stay until it can all be properly secured with the neckband. I was still really undecided on the sleeves at this point, despite the many references I had come across in my research. I ended up just gathering the bottom cuff like I did the neckline and called it good enough for the moment. Trying the chemise on, it was very obviously too big on me. I wanted the chemise to hang just at the edge of my shoulders for this very wide neckline look, but the gathering needed to be pulled quite a bit more to fit comfortably. The sleeves were amusingly long on me as expected, and the front of the chemise was unfortunately the exact length that I was hoping for when I started this project. I did end up ultimately deciding to just trim the length to where the back was, with the full intention of adding ruffles later to the bottom, but more on this later. I gathered the top to where I thought I wanted it and secured it in place with a pin, using the thread tails as an anchor. I didn't want the gathers to unravel before I could tie it all into place. With one more quick try on, I was much happier with the fit and we could move on to the next step. The piece to finish the neckline of the garment was 2 inches by 36 inches, which ended up being slightly too short. I should have made it 40 inches or so, but I just fixed it by adding another little strip to the back to cover those raw edges, with the bonus of now having a very obvious indicator which side is the front and back, not too upset by it. I ironed the 1/4 inch seam allowance down so it'd be easier to attach to the top of the chemise. I should note here that I didn't iron it in half like I should have, and I didn't realize my mistake until after I had already sewn one side down. This caused some twisting to happen when I finished the other side, most of it ironed out in the end, but I would have achieved a much better finish if I would have done this step first. After laying out the pattern pieces for the neckline and doing some quick math, I came to the conclusion I had enough leftover material to make 3 7-inch width strips of fabric for the ruffles, which would be more than enough depending on how gathered I wanted to make it. So I went ahead and cut out the ruffles and finished the seams after they were stitched together. I ended up pinning the ruffle to the bottom of the chemise just to see how it would look before I went through all of the hassle of attaching it and ultimately decided I liked it better without. I'll still keep the material for a while just in case I change my mind again, but the slightly shorter length was really starting to grow on me by this point. After one side of the neckline is in place and all the gathers are secured, we can trim off this top ruffly bit and trim up all the long threads so we can do the other side. I'm also going to even up the seam allowance along this bottom edge, so when we double roll and whip stitch it down, the seam will be nice and even. Overall, I'm really happy with how this garment turned out. It's extremely comfortable, especially when worn with a corset, and I think the overall fit of the garment came out perfect despite losing that length along the bottom edge. That being said though, the sleeves do need a little work like I mentioned earlier. When I originally planned this garment and the other projects I wanted it for, I was hoping to be able to use it on a more day-to-day basis as a nightgown or a house dress, but the sleeves make it a little too cumbersome to be practical the way they are now. At some point in the future, I'd love to make another one with a shorter sleeve for this very reason, but for now, this is where I will leave it.